So your fourth album, Lux, is set to be released on May 15th. Let's talk a little bit about the writing of this album and how it came together.
Sure. So I guess from a thematic perspective, there's a lot to unpack, I suppose, and so I'll try to do so without rambling too much.
Would you say that the lyrical and thematic aspects influenced the musical aspects of the album? Did you come up with your lyrical themes first?
It's kind of a weird chicken egg scenario that like it's hard to say save for specific examples when certain things came. Without trying to sound too weird here, I'll just posit that I'm very interested in the idea of precognition and then also retrocausation. Precognition, we're probably most of us are probably familiar with the idea of like you think of an old friend that maybe you haven't seen in 10 years or something like that, and the next thing you know that you get a text from them, right? So that could be a sort of precognitive experience. But there's also the notion of retrocausation where for lack of a better description, it seems that certain future events help create the present. And so that's definitely a factor on, at least in my personal experience with the writing of this particular record, because I thought thematically I knew what the record was about pretty firmly as we went in to go and record it. And then as our lives sort of developed throughout the course of that, even after the recording, I came to learn that certain compositions were about much different things or were about much more than just what I had initially presumed them to be about. So I don't mean to be evasive in this response, but I don't really know, because okay, it might help to give you some more context. So the broader theme of the record is something of a toying with the idea of a prima materia, or a fundamental root essence that pervades the manifest world, the manifest universe, like existence itself, right? And so from the perspective of all sorts of different esoteric minds, this has been characterized as a lot of different things, right? The chief analogies that I've employed in this record are all is mind, all is sound, and all is light. Particularly all is light, with a record called Lux, or the Latin for light. The light analogy is fairly central for me, but the idea that everything can be boiled down to light at its fundamental essence. And so we're talking about like the fabric of the all, of divinity or God or being, whatever you want to characterize that as, right? And so on one level, the album functions as a form of, I guess, esoteric prayer in that capacity. At the same time, in the last couple of years, we've seen the birth of my daughter, whom we named a name that gets its origins from that same Latin lux root essence. So our daughter Lucia was born in the last couple of years. So on one level, the album functions as this form of prayer, and then on the same time, it's kind of a communication to my infant daughter, whose name is also tied to this whole sort of solar or light imagery. So that's what I thought it was about, right? Broadly speaking. But when you get into, I guess, esoteric treatments of solar cycles, there's always a dawn and there's a dusk, right? And there's themes of birth, rebirth, death, and renewal, right? I wasn't thinking about the death facets of this cycle when I was initially writing it. But as we finished recording, basically down to almost the hour, it transpired that my spouse's father passed away basically as we finished recording this. And I had no idea at the time, right? And I had these two compositions that I have a friend from the Colorado Symphony performing on. He plays an instrument called a viola del mare on it. And I had thought of these two tracks as being called Dawn and Dusk, because they're very similar composition. And I was thinking of using them as basically bookends to different sort of transition points on the record, without really thinking of the implications of Dawn and Dusk from like a life-death perspective. And of course, we have this experience where death very tangibly starts to impact our lives in the loss of a near and dear loved one. And we wound up playing this recording that we had basically finished on the day and almost to the hour of his passing at his memorial service that transpired like a week later. So I guess this is a circuitous route of me kind of getting back to that notion of precognition and retrocausation, because I didn't think it was about these certain themes at the time with the ends of cycles and the subsequent implications of rebirth too, but it's very much there. So a lot of these ideas seemed to be getting sort of pulled forward by something that's beyond me from a temporal perspective. I hope that didn't sound too batshit. Does that make any sense?
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't really have any background in what you're talking about. So whether or not, well, no, I mean, I'm just saying, whether or not I personally understood it, I will say that from looking at the notes for the album, this is an incredibly well-considered album. And in terms of the philosophy and the thought process behind it, it's clear that you put a lot of thought into it. And even post-creation, a lot of thought into the way it ties into certain themes and certain life events and things like that. I will ask you, because you brought up esoteric thinking and, to some extent, the supernatural, or, things beyond our understanding. To what extent do you believe in magic or esoteric knowledge? And I know that's a, that seems like a weird question, but it is.
It's not a weird question. I just wrote a record that's drenched in that shit, so it's a fair question. I guess without like giving away too much about my own personal practices or beliefs, I believe, or let's dispense with the word belief actually for this conversation. Magic, I guess, is something that I've experienced in my own life. And as far as the Western occult tradition is concerned, that's definitely something that's had an influence on me, and certainly has some echoes in the themes of this record. Without going too deeply into it, I've been captivated by Kabbalistic thought, particularly Hermetic Kabbalah, sort of the approach of, I guess, the backbone of the Western Hermetic Kabbalistic esoteric tradition is definitely something that has multiple points of reference on the new record. And to no one's surprise, given that we named our last record Ein Safar, which is the third veil of negative pre-existence just prior to manifestation in Kabbalistic philosophy. But it's definitely a prominent factor in my work.
Now, do you believe in magic in a literal sense, or is magic a kind of metaphor or way of looking at the physical world?
I think you may have answered your own question there in that latter description, but and for the sake of not getting into pedantic arguments about what is or isn't on this call, I'll just say that when I talk about magic, I'm talking about this through the lens of like the Western esoteric perspective, and magic with a K, sort of magic. And a lot of that, I think, like when people are unfamiliar with the Western occult tradition, a lot of times they can misconstrue just what it is that's going on, or is or isn't going on. It's that because or isness is not necessarily of prime importance here. And I guess there's, for me, a current in that broader sphere of things that's about radical self-transformation and trying to achieve higher potential of one's self, kind of grasping towards self-actualization, things like that. So, for fear of not getting too wooey on this conversation here, I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that. And that I've found profound meaning in my own spiritual journey, exploring these things, and that I'll just say that they can be profoundly transformative and can lead to remarkable things in one's own experience. And what somebody else might call mere happenstance or coincidence might be a profound synchronicity for somebody else. So I suppose it's up to each individual and whatever their own path happens to be.
Crowley said that the world is black to the blind, but blue and gold to everyone who has the one true sight.
It's a very Jovian choice of colors that you picked right there.
But in terms of believing in magic or not believing in magic, if you don't want to see it, it's not there, and if you do see it, then it's there for you.
He also there's a great quote. Like he said, and I'm going to paraphrase here and probably butcher it, much to the chagrin of any Lemites that might be listening to your show, but he said something to the effect of, when you perform certain experiments, certain results follow. The practitioner would be well advised not to attribute objective reality to anything.
I spoke to a musician some time back who said that music is magic. Music is a form of magic, because music is an ephemeral thing that causes events in the physical world. Do you feel that your music is a form of magic?
I think I would agree with that characterization. I think that's well put. Whoever that musician was that characterized that, I think music is absolutely magic. But I think that there's a whole lot that we don't recognize in our mundane experience that is magic as well. I think that as a rule, humans are fundamentally creative beings, and that our creative capacities, however they may manifest, is a form of magic in and of itself. It's manifesting something out of nothing, like just the capacity to write or create anything is a form of manifestation that I think is fundamentally divine.
Now, would you, because I've read a little bit of Crowley, I've read a few things here and there. I wouldn't say I know a tremendous amount about any of this, but would you say that your music or your songs are spells?
I don't know about that particularly, because like when I think of a spell, there's like a particular outcome or desired effect that might be in place there. That's not necessarily how I would characterize our compositions. I mean, like, have I written things that might have that sort of element to them potentially? But like, by and large, I wouldn't say that all of our songs are spells, so to speak. But I guess this could devolve into a pedantic discussion of what a spell is or isn't.
My podcast is nothing if not pedantic. Epic.
Not so far, man. This is a pretty cool conversation so far. So yeah, like no, I don't get that sense.
I'm known for epic arguments about whether a black death metal band is more black or more death, and whether or not their corpse paint makes them a black metal band.
The only answer is none more black. No, like we're gonna make a fucking Spinal Tap. Yeah. So I think music is, and any creative sort of pursuit is fundamentally magical in my perspective. But I think that we're all constantly practicing magic without necessarily the vocabulary or self-awareness to realize it. So yeah, I suppose they're all spells.